Don't you ever want to just be left alone? You just want to stay home and make sure no one bothers you. But what if you were actually afraid to step foot outside your house? Well, I guess a lot of people in 2020 are like this due to COVID. But what if the world was back to normal again? And your own delusions were the ones keeping you from stepping outside. Welcome to Dumb Down, the show where we summarize movies in hopes of understanding them better. Today, we dumb down Lunatics, a love story. A movie starring none other than Ted Raimi. We have previously done a video on another Ted Raimi joint. If you want to check that out, there'll be a link in the description. And while you're doing that, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. Ted Raimi is a reclusive poet that lives in a shitty apartment in 90s downtown LA. He has spent the last 6 months inside his apartment, afraid to go outside. He's constantly being plagued with wacky delusions. Delusions such as evil doctors, played by Bruce Campbell.
Now, Hank, just hold still. This won't hurt a bit.
Claymation spiders. Billboards coming to life. And even cheesy 90s rappers.
The core in your brain is a cherry red. There's a crack in the reactor inside your head.
Meanwhile, somewhere else in 90s LA, Nancy seems to have the shittiest luck around. She tries to pet a dog for it just to run and get ran over by a truck. Her boyfriend, also played by Bruce Campbell, dumps her after bringing her to LA from her small town.
I thought that maybe you and I had a future together.
Yeah, well, you thought that because you're nuts. Come on, look at us. We don't have anything in common. After listening to you spout poetry for 5 days in the car, you're lucky I didn't dump you in Death Valley.
He even leaves her to pay the motel bill.
You get the money you owe me?
After being kicked out of the motel for not having the money, she begins to wander the streets. Being new to the area, she ends up in the wrong part of town, where she comes across some of the goofiest looking 90s gangsters. They step up to her wanting to mug her, among other things.
I think we're gonna pull a train on you, 6 cars long.
Thinking on her feet, she steals one of their guns and shoots the leader on the foot. Nancy takes off running as the gangsters follow her.
We're gonna get that bitch! It's the last thing we do!
Eventually, she finds herself hiding inside of a phone booth. Back to Ted, he's trying to convince himself that everything is just fine.
I feel great. This is the best I've felt in a long time.
But after looking through the paper, he decides to call a phone sex operator, and through some magical phone glitch that is never explained to us, he instead calls the phone booth where Nancy is hiding. Once she answers, he obviously believes that he's talking to a sex operator, and he mentions that he's lonely, and that he thought if any of the girls would start to like him on the phone, maybe they would just visit him. And in one of the most incomprehensible acts that I witnessed in a movie, she decides to ask for his address so that she could go over. Mainly because the gangsters are still hot on her tail and getting closer and closer to her. But still, it is ridiculous to imagine that someone would receive a wrong call and ask to go to that person's house. But let's continue. She arrives at his apartment, and it does not take long for her to realize that Ted is pretty loony.
Nancy!
Hank?
Hi. Oh, wow. You actually came.
And regardless of this, she still walks inside his apartment.
Why?
This lady wants to get murdered. Once inside his living room, she starts commenting on all the tinfoil that he has wallpapering his walls. So she begins to tell him that she has to leave because this is all way too weird.
Don't worry, nothing's gonna happen to you here.
Get the fuck out!
He pleads for her to stay and offers her some food. And since she's broke and hungry, she agrees to stay. But regardless of her staying, everything he says continues to sound crazy to her and to us.
You seem to have a lot of books about people that have killed themselves. Ernest Hemingway did. Janis Joplin.
Oh, them.
Have you ever thought about committing suicide?
No.
We'll put you in the mental hospital.
I tried to kill myself.
However, she feels a bit safe being in his apartment, being that she still has the goofy gangster's gun, and she's already used it before. Eventually, in an effort to feel less weird about the whole situation, Nancy begins to have small talk, and she asks if he likes poetry.
I love poetry. I write poetry.
But when she asks to read one of his poems, he has to run to the bathroom to have another fit.
It was like the worst film I ever read. It was terrible, horrible.
When she gets to read the poem, Nancy actually likes it, other than admitting that it's a bit dark. Damn, it looks like Ted might get some action.
Call me T-Money. That's my new thing, you understand?
Since she likes his poetry, he starts putting on some moves. He even starts improvising some corny-ass poems.
I would never treat you bad. I would always make you glad. And if you ever should be sad, I'd never act like my dad. I just made that up.
We can definitely tell you just made that up, Ted. I guess she was impressed by his Dr. Seuss rhymes, so she asks him if he could stay a couple of days, just until the goofy thugs stop looking for her. However, in the middle of this conversation, Ted goes right into another one of his delusions.
This may sting a little bit, Hank.
The same imaginary doctor that has been terrorizing him starts attacking him again. And not only does he look like a fool in front of Nancy, who was starting to like him, he ends up punching the hell out of her. Nancy goes unconscious from the punch, and when she wakes up, she confuses Ted with one of the gangsters. She quickly pulls out the gun and shoots, almost hitting Ted. She freaks out because she almost killed him and heads for the door to leave. Ted begs her not to go, and he kisses her, but she still opens the door and takes off. Nancy starts wandering the streets of 90s downtown LA again, as Ted is crippled with fear and sadness in his apartment, unable to chase after her.
I'm gonna spend the rest of eternity locked in this room by myself.
All of his delusions start attacking him at once, making him snap, to the point that he decides to go out into the world for the first time in 6 months, just to get Nancy back, his only possible chance at love, even though they just met. But first, he has to suit up for the outside world. Now dressed up as bootleg Iron Man, he's ready to go into the elements. But as he opens the door, he will first have to go face to face with more of his delusions.
All right, you quacks. Let's do it. Outstanding.
After defeating all of them, he begins roaming the streets of 90s LA. But things aren't so easy for Ted. Out in the elements, he begins having new delusions. He starts having visions of the ground splitting up underneath his feet. For a moment, he thinks that he's in a forest, and he even starts to think that giant spiders are chasing him. While Ted is learning about this new outside world, Nancy is randomly roaming the streets. But her bad luck continues to haunt her because the goofy-ass gangsters from earlier begin following her. While hiding, Nancy begins to contemplate suicide. But as she brings the gun to her mouth, she sees Ted being chased by a garbage truck. However, in his mind, it is obviously a giant spider. Duh. The truck drives away after she shoots at it. After this, Ted tells her to come stay with him, but she's still reluctant to do so, partly because he's crazy as fuck, and partly because she thinks she's a nuisance to the world. She leaves Ted behind yet again, and continues to aimlessly roam the streets of this cartoony-ass world. But her bad luck bites her in the ass yet again, because the leader of Goofy Gang finds her and holds her at knife point. He's ready to get revenge for his lost toe.
Dead, bitch. T-E-D, dead.
However, Aluminum Man comes to the rescue.
Leave her alone.
What are you?
Me? I'm the guy who's gonna kick your ass.
And now it's time for the ultimate showdown. Ted Raimi versus the leader of Goofy Gang.
I wonder what Nancy's up to.
And of course, Ted defeats him. Nancy changes her mind completely. Ted decides that he will start leaving the house again, and he even invites her to his brother's wedding. I'm guessing Sam Raimi's wedding. The movie ends with Ted and Nancy slow dancing at the wedding, destined to live happily ever after, all because of a magical phone booth. The end. This has been Lunatics, a love story, dumbed down. One of the most cartoony live-action movies I have ever seen. The director of this movie went on to write and direct the classic, and I mean classic, Sci-Fi Channel original crap fest that is Alien Apocalypse. At least we can say that Lunatics is much more enjoyable than his later efforts. The performance by Ted Raimi is enjoyable as hell. I feel like he can make any movie infinitely better with only his presence. Well guys, make sure to like, subscribe, tell all your friends about our channel. We will greatly appreciate it. Also, while you're at it, go follow us on Instagram.
See ya! Bye! Get the fuck out of here now.
If you want any more of that, you can come by and see us again, yeah?